Hear me out. The more that I started playing Ocarina of Time, the more I started to notice that I was getting more annoyed with it than usual. Ocarina of Time used to be my favorite game of all time. It was my first Zelda game ever. I grew up with the N64. My brother gave me his old copy of Ocarina of Time, and it was the first 3D Zelda ever. So why would a game that I loved as a child, all of a sudden, whenever I become older, become something that I started to like less and less? So originally what this video was going to be titled was, why do I hate Ocarina of Time the more that I play it? But I decided to stream Ocarina of Time, just vanilla start to end all the way through, again, over on my Twitch to see if my opinion still stayed the same. And what started to happen was that I started giving it a chance. I didn't skip any dialogue, and I kind of enjoyed it. So this is more of a video, more so of me talking about what I like about Ocarina of Time, what I don't like about Ocarina of Time, and more of like a retrospective, a pros and cons list, I guess, more so than just bashing the game, because originally it was more of a, why am I hating it the more that I play it? But now it's more so of like, okay, maybe I was giving this too much criticism. This was kind of my journey in searching for those answers and really trying to get an understanding as to why I was having those feelings. This is my first time doing something like this, so if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I apologize. So the story of Ocarina of Time, going back and actually reading it, is really interesting, because something I didn't really realize as a child is that it is a lot darker than I had thought originally. Because, you know, as a 5-year-old kid playing Ocarina of Time for the first time, I doubt you're really reading the dialogue all that much. You're really reading the story. You just kind of stumble around until you figure out the right way to go. When you just take a step back and you just look at it at point value for what it is, you see a child literally just become the savior of Hyrule, going from a, I think, like 7-8-year-old. I don't know if it's ever really confirmed or not. That's just kind of where I've guessed at. But then he's stuck in the Sacred Realm for 7 years. And so he is in this adult body, and they kind of hint at him being grown up now. But what I've always understood is that Link's child mind is still in his adult body. So there's no real growth going on where he's at. So just the story of Link and his backstory of like how his mother was killed, everything that's happened to him, and just what he has to do as a child in the body of an adult. Like, he's lost 7 years of his life so far up to this point, and just everything that goes on to become the hero of Hyrule. What I never really understood either was that the whole thing about the story of Ocarina of Time, when you're a kid, right, you have to get the spiritual stones, and you have to put them into the Temple of Time to unlock the Door of Time to get the Master Sword, right? And the Master Sword is the key to the Sacred Realm. But Ganondorf just kind of lets Link do whatever he wants and leads him into the Sacred Realm. So, like, I get for the point of the plot and the story, they don't do this. But if he just thought that Princess Zelda was fucking crazy, he could have just left that alone, and Ganondorf would have never been able to get into the Sacred Realm, because he never would have gotten the stones or gotten access to the Master Sword or to the Sacred Realm. So I don't really get the whole point that the Master Sword was the key to it all. You know, if the Master Sword is what is keeping evil away, why mess with it? I don't really get that, but I just think that the history of Hyrule 2 in the story was very interesting. Like, you go to the Shadow Temple, which we'll get to in the dungeon section more so on that, but the Shadow Temple and just hearing about, like, the dark and, like, bloody past of Hyrule, and like that the history is written in blood and death and things like that. And it's just like, when you really look into the details of the dialogue of the story, it is way darker than it just kind of appears gameplay wise or even overworld wise. I mean, really the only kind of like dark and gloomy or scary aspects you really get are the bottom of the well and really the Shadow Temple. I mean, I guess you could count, if you really wanted to go creepy, more so the older version of the Fire Temple when you're an adult, that has that creepy chanting, but the version I played didn't have that, so I don't know. Whenever I grew up, I don't think I had that version either. Maybe I did, because there's always that version with like the red and green blood too, and I remember my old N64 cartridge as a kid had the red blood. I remember that vividly. I was like, oh dude, blood, like that's sick! But even just like the Deku tree dying, I feel like it's just a really strong start. Like, I mean, I get it's a tree, right? But still, like, that's the literal first dungeon beginning of the game, and it's like, oh yeah, dude, I'm dead. See you later. Go out and save the world, bud. Like, I feel like that's just a lot of pressure for a child, you know? I feel like at the end it's kind of Link's choice, but he didn't, obviously for the sake of the game, I think I'm diving too deep into like a real world situation compared to like a video game plot situation to where, obviously if Link was just like, fuck it, man, I don't want to do that, he wouldn't have a game to play. I guess one of my cons about not really like the story, but more so the dialogue is that someone who's played the game a lot, who knows what the items are and the item descriptions, the fact that you can't really like press a button to fast forward the item descriptions like you can fast forward most of the dialogue in the game is a little tedious. Is it like the end of the world? No, it's just me being in a rush because I already know what the items do. So as a new player who is looking to read those descriptions, I could see that they would be a really good information. It's just something that I'm going to be nitpicky about because, I have to have something to complain about, right? Because if I don't, then it's just like, the game is great. Something I was really thinking about too, in trying to put myself in the perspective of a new player, being that is Navi really as annoying as we think? Because it's kind of like an inside joke now that Navi is just a really annoying, co-op side character that we have. But now that I think that we have like Fi as something to compare it to in Skyward Sword, Fi or Fi, whatever. But Skyward Sword's interrupting, I think someone timed it before to where it's like every 3 minutes or so. And especially if your Wii Remote's dying, holy shit, man. Like, that's going to be way more. So I think now that we have something to compare it to, if you have played Skyward Sword before compared to Ocarina of Time, I think Navi is way less annoying. Again, you don't have to talk to her. Like, it is totally your choice. You don't have to flick C up to talk to Navi. No one's holding a gun to your head to have you interact with her. She's just there if you need help. But yeah, I really don't think that she's as annoying as we have let on, because we have had way more annoying companions in comparison to Navi since then. Something I've also really wanted to talk about, just a random side note, was the possibility of Link speaking in Ocarina of Time. I'm going to break this down really quick because the next line is important. Anyone else, for the rest of the game, in the beginning of the game and for the rest of the game, Link's name, or whatever name you name your person, is always just normal white text. I'm going to turn into MatPat really quick and game theory this shit. I think this next line is the first and only time Link talks in this game. Because some people are like, oh, like, Link doesn't talk, whatever, blah, blah, blah. When Link says his name, it's green text. Any other time when the Great Deku Tree said it, when, like, anybody else says it in the game, it's white. But this is the only time that it's green. So I have always, even as a kid, been under the implication that this is the only thing that Link says in this entire game. And I want to know if you guys, like, agree with that or, like, have ever thought about that. Because that's just where my brain goes. Watch. What is your name? And then it goes to Link. There's ellipses because he hesitates. And then that's him. It's something that I have, like, been going crazy about. And I've really not seen any sort of, like, confirmation or denying anybody talking about it, really. But just something that I don't know if I'm going to get an answer to, but something I just wanted to throw out there. Because I just thought it was really cool, if that is true. Now, the overworld is something that is interesting, right? Because I've really had to kind of take a step back and really look at what the overworld is. More so overworld, this is just the world design of the games. As a kid, I would literally just boot up Ocarina of Time on my brother's fully complete save file and just walk around the towns and kind of just do nothing but talk to the NPCs over and over again and just kind of like role play in my own world of like my own story of what was going on. So I spent a lot of time in the towns, and I will have to say that probably where this game shines in terms of world design are the towns. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Like, you got to make these stand out. I really, really, really love the world designs of the town. Where I think it falls short is the overworld, specifically Hyrule Field. For its time, I feel like, back in the 90s when this game first came out, this was world-changing. It was the first 3D Zelda ever made. and this field felt so vast, so expansive. Now that we have other games to go by, we've played other open world games, we've played other Zelda games. Now going back to Hyrule Field, what once felt open feels very bland. I just don't really think there's a whole lot going on here. The only things that you really have in Hyrule Field are those, little holes that lead you down to chests. And I think that's also where it kind of falls short for me, is that you don't really get rewarded all that much for your exploration in Hyrule Field. It's not really worth exploring. Like, one, there's not that much, but two, when you do find secrets and you feel good about yourself and then you get that reward, you're just like, oh, yeah, I mean, I guess. I really love the iconic towns. I feel like those have always been a staple, somewhere that I've spent countless hours as a kid just running around, just, wall to wall, fully exploring where I can go in those places and just kind of see what's in there. But then in a vast comparison, the open world is just very bland. Now the dungeons. So this is going to be the weird part in the dungeons, and I might rant a little bit because I have a few things to say about these. There's not really any pros and cons about the dungeon design that I've had specifically. I've done these dungeons so much as a kid, so I'm very familiar with them in terms of how to navigate them. But something that I've really wanted to talk about that has come up in my chat a lot whenever I stream this is two things. Someone in chat had mentioned, they're like, oh, do you do Shadow Temple or Spirit Temple first? And I'm like, what do you mean? Because it's always been Shadow Spirit. I've always done Shadow Temple first and then Spirit Temple second. And then surprisingly, a few people were like, nah, man, Spirit Temple first, Shadow Temple second. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And since playing through this again, I see where people would get that understanding in terms of the medallion placement in the menu, because it goes Spirit Shadow, Shadow Medallion being last. I get that, but something I noticed in this recent playthrough is that the dialogue literally sets you up for Shadow and then Spirit. You have to watch that whole cutscene of Sheik getting thrown around and just yeeted, and then it leads to the events of getting the Lens of Truth. And then Sheik tells you where the Shadow Temple is and where to go and teaches you the song on how to get there. And so my understanding wasn't really like, okay, why would I go through that whole dialogue section being told where to go to Shadow first and then being like, hey, deuces, I'm going to get the Lens of Truth. I'm going to go on the other side of the map and do Spirit instead. Because as a beginner player, how would you even know where the Spirit Temple is? Just with my playstyle, if I've been told, hey, here's the song, here's where the Shadow Temple is, it's in the graveyard, literally 5 steps that way, that would be where I would go next, right? But there were just an increasing amount of people who did Spirit first and then Shadow. I just never understood it, because you have to get the Lens of Truth. You have to watch that cutscene for Shadow Temple first, learn the song to go to the graveyard, and, go back in the past as a kid to get the Lens of Truth. And then you need the Lens of Truth to go across the desert to do Spirit Temple anyway. So you still have to watch the cutscenes for Shadow Temple before going to Spirit. I just want to get a better understanding of why people did Spirit first, or kind of what their thought process was. For my playthrough of this time, whenever I streamed it, I did Spirit first and Shadow, and it fully solidified my Shadow first, Spirit second. It just felt so out of place. It felt like I was doing it backwards. Because if you do Shadow first, then you can have the hover boots for the desert, the hover boots for the Spirit Temple dungeon. It just makes traversing it just a little bit easier. It feels so weird doing Spirit first. So again, I would love to know what you guys did, what your order was. Did you do Shadow first? Did you do Spirit first? It is pretty cool that, you have the option, kind of bringing an open world aspect of choice in the linearity of this game. But also at the same time, if you're a new player who's never played Ocarina of Time before, you wouldn't really know that you could do that. So, I mean, I guess it's just cool for the people who know the game really well. I just thought it was interesting. I would love to know your opinion. Now we get to talk about the Water Temple. And I think there's something that I might have noticed that is the problem for me with the Water Temple. And I don't think it's the fact that it's a Water Temple. I think it's because it is a vertical dungeon. Because I had the same thing whenever I played Majora's Mask for the first time and I played through Snowhead Temple. I didn't like that dungeon either. It's so confusing, man, because as a kid, the one thing that always got me is raising and lowering the water levels, right? And just fully exploring the levels and fully doing everything that you need to do on said level before raising it up. If you mess up, you have to go all the way back to the bottom, reset the water, go through the whole dungeon again, raise the water level up again. And it's just really, really confusing for beginner players or just people who don't know the dungeon that well. Mostly my fault, probably because I wasn't paying attention to the cutscene and things like that. But the specific middle room when you raise the water level to the second level and it raises that platform up, and then you have to use your iron boots to go into that hole around the spikes and it leads you to a key multiple times. And you would think I would remember. I know now, but multiple times, even in my 3DS playthrough, I would totally forget about that. Just progress through the dungeon as is, and then bam, dude, there's a key door. I don't have a key. Where do I go? And then I have to go through the entire dungeon again just to figure out where I went wrong or what I missed. And then it's always that hole. It has always been that hole in the center room. Skill issue. I get it, right? Is it really the design of the dungeon, or like they literally play a cutscene showing you that the platform raises? I feel like even now, it being a vertical dungeon, I just think the design of the water temple is just super confusing, but I really do think it's more so for me the fact that it is a vertical dungeon and not the fact that it is a water dungeon itself. Now, the next category that I want to get into is the gameplay. Now, the gameplay I really enjoy for multiple reasons. I really like the Z-targeting system. I think Z-targeting in Zelda games is a staple. I think it works really well. The only thing that I think Egoraptor, Aaron Hansen on Sequelitis talked about a lot that really brought it to my attention when I first watched it was the whole wait and attack sequence. I really do agree. I don't think there's much more to be said about that part of the combat, to where you really do just, for most enemies, have to just put your shield up or just wait for them to attack for you have an opening to attack them. And I just really don't like that kind of pacing for combat. Something that I've kind of noticed is that if I kind of just crouch down or like just spam crouch stab and just hit them a bunch, even if they're shielding, then I can just spam attack through the whole process, which is kind of boring. But more so, what I like about the gameplay are just kind of really the speed running tricks that I've kind of learned over time. There's been multiple people in my chat for me playing different Zelda games kind of teaching me little tricks, not anything game breaking or huge. I'm not out here looking to be number one on the leaderboard speedrunning. I just think it's kind of cool to learn those moves just to kind of add some spice of life or new things to a video game that I grew up with, just through other people who are nice enough to teach me or want to see me learn these things and then are super excited when they see it happen. It just adds a bit of flavor to the gameplay that has once been kind of stale and stagnant because it's just been same. So learning something new and something that you thought you knew the ins and outs about is a really cool thing. Something that I've really been enjoying is the multiplayer mod and the randomizer for Ocarina of Time. I think playing Ocarina of Time, even if you're not playing a randomizer, playing it with friends, for those of you who don't know, there is a multiplayer mod out there, and it allows you to play with your friends in the same world. The bosses are still, they're not together, so you can't fight bosses together, but items are shared. So if someone finds something, it immediately goes into your inventory. It just makes doing dungeons and just exploring the world much more fun when you're doing it with friends. I would highly recommend it if you have the chance to do it yourself. If you do the old Google search, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So go check it out there. It's a lot of fun. I would highly recommend it. And the multiplayer mod allows you to do randomizers with it as well, to where you can just do randomizers with friends, which I think brings a lot of casualness into it for people who are new to randomizers, who might be a little hesitant or afraid. Having the ability to do a randomizer to where if someone finds something and it's immediately shared in your inventory, sometimes I feel like I'm not contributing to the randomizer if I'm not finding things. So it kind of takes that away a little bit. There's tons of videos out there as well that show you how to install it. It's great. With that being said, I don't know what else to say. So yeah, even after all that, I mean, I don't really know what it was, but you know, before I was really finding a heavy annoyance with Ocarina of Time, but this playthrough specifically, I really expected to see my opinion stay the same, but when I really just gave it a chance and I just kind of slowed down and read the dialogue as if I was playing it for the first time, just not being in any rush and just really trying to absorb the game for what it is and what it was trying to do in its time. It was the first 3D Zelda game. It was so revolutionary. I mean, I feel like it's been a lot of people's first Zeldas. It's a lot of people's favorite Zeldas. It used to be my favorite game of all time, but I think now that I'm older, I can take a step back and look at it and understand that it might not be a perfect game, but it doesn't mean that I should hate it. it's healthy and good to look back at childhood favorite things and just see if, are we a little nostalgia blind? Is it really, really perfect, or are there certain things wrong with it? Multiple Zelda games have come out since then, and I've been playing a lot of them on stream. I've just been comparing it a lot to what Zelda games are now compared to what they were. And Ocarina of Time was the stepping stone for those games, don't get me wrong. There are just so many different Zelda games out there now that do what Ocarina did just a lot better. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, because it's just what happens with time. Developers learn and they adapt and they create new things and they try new things, and I think it works out really well. So I don't think Ocarina of Time is bad. It is definitely not a perfect game by any means, but I would love to know, what is your childhood game that you might have loved that looking back on, or the more that you play it now, that it just doesn't have that same feeling anymore? Take that, look at it again, play through it again, just take your time with it, read the dialogue, and just kind of see what's going on in that game and just what that might be for you. I would love to know. This was kind of my first time trying something like this, so if you liked it, just let me know. Something that I've really wanted to talk about that's been just itching at me as to why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. Try to put it in a very cohesive way. If it did or did not, I apologize again. I'm learning. This has been a lot of fun, though. I've really enjoyed it. And this is the point where I shamelessly plug my Twitch, because this is where all this gameplay came from. So if you want to hang out live, head over to twitch.tv/edacattack. We would love to have you. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. Peace out, Girl Scouts. Bye.